Nakayima, the ghost who lived in the tree. There are places in Uganda where the darkness seems to arrive before the sun has completely disappeared. Places where the trees stand so close together that even during the day the ground beneath them remains dim, and where old stories are not told merely for entertainment, but carried from one generation to another with the seriousness of family history. In Mubende, there is a hill that has for centuries been surrounded by stories of spirits, kings, healers, and things that belong to a world older than the roads, houses, and trading centers that now surround it. On that hill stands the enormous Nakayiima Tree, its roots spreading outward like walls built by something that understood secrets better than human beings ever could. The real tree and shrine are associated with the ancient Bakwezi traditions, and people have long regarded the place as spiritually significant, visiting it with prayers, offerings, and requests for healing, fertility, prosperity, and protection. But the story I am about to tell you is not a historical account, and it is not a claim that the spirits of Nakayima truly walk among the living. It is an old-style fictional Ugandan ghost tale inspired by those traditions. The kind of story that might be whispered beside a fire when the night has become too quiet and someone suddenly asks, "Have you ever heard what happened to the man who laughed at Nakayima?" Because according to the tale, there was once a man who believed that ghosts were inventions of frightened people, that spirits belonged only to old women's stories, and that no tree, no shrine, and no dead princess could ever frighten him. His name was Kato, and by the time he discovered that some stories are dangerous to mock, the village had already begun to wonder whether Nakayima had been waiting for him. Kato was born in a small village not far from Mubende, in a place where the roads were still mostly red earth, and where people knew the names of the hills that surrounded them. He was a strong young man, tall, broad-shouldered, and confident, with the kind of confidence that often grows in a person who has never yet met something he cannot overcome. He was a farmer when he needed to be, a trader when opportunity appeared, and an occasional hunter when the forest seemed generous. But there was something unusual about Kato. He did not fear the things that frightened everyone else. When children were told not to walk near certain trees after sunset, Kato deliberately walked there. When old men warned young people never to whistle near the shrine because the sound might attract wandering spirits, Kato would whistle loudly and laugh when the others became uncomfortable. Once, when an elderly woman told him never to speak disrespectfully about Nakayima because she was not merely a name, but a spiritual figure deeply respected by generations of people, Kato had laughed so loudly that the woman looked at him with genuine sadness. "You laugh because you are young," she told him. "One day you will understand why old people do not laugh at everything." Kato had smiled and replied, "Jaja, if Nakayima is truly there, let her come and show me." The woman had stared at him for several seconds before turning away. "Do not invite what you do not understand," she whispered. Kato heard her, but he did not listen. The first strange thing happened during the dry season, when the grass around the hills had turned brown and the evenings carried dust from distant roads. Kato had gone into the forest late one afternoon to check traps he had placed for small game. He knew the area well and had walked through it many times, but on that particular evening he took a path he had never used before. The path climbed gradually toward the hill, winding between trees whose trunks were so large that two men standing shoulder to shoulder could not have wrapped their arms around them. As he climbed, the sounds of the village faded behind him. The laughter of children disappeared first, then the voices of farmers, then even the familiar sounds of goats and chickens became distant. Eventually, Kato could hear only his own footsteps pressing into dry leaves. He should have turned back. Instead, he continued until he reached the enormous tree that locals associated with Nakayima. He stood before it and stared upward. The tree was so large that its branches seemed to hold up a portion of the evening sky. Its roots rose from the ground like enormous ribs, creating dark spaces between them. Kato smiled. "So this is where the great Nakayima lives," he said aloud. His voice sounded strangely small beneath the tree. He stepped closer and placed one hand against the rough bark. It was warm from the afternoon sun. "You are only a tree," he whispered, "nothing more." He turned to leave, and that was when he heard the woman singing. The sound came from somewhere behind him, so soft that at first he thought it was the wind passing through the leaves. He stopped and listened. There it was again, a woman's voice carrying a slow, mournful melody. It was not a song he recognized. The voice sounded old, but not weak. It carried the strange quality of someone singing from a great distance while standing only a few steps away. Kato turned around slowly. There was nobody there. He searched between the roots, looked toward the path, and even climbed onto a small mound of earth so he could see farther into the forest. Nothing moved. The singing stopped. He laughed nervously. "So that is the great Nakayima?" he called. "A voice hiding behind trees?" No answer came. He began walking down the hill, but after perhaps 50 steps, he heard the song again. This time it was closer. Kato stopped. His skin prickled. He looked behind him. Nothing. The song ended with a single, long note. Then a woman's voice spoke from somewhere near the tree. "You were told not to call me." Kato froze. He knew that voice had not come from his imagination. He had heard it clearly. He stood staring into the darkness between the trees, his mouth slightly open, waiting for whoever had spoken to appear. Nobody did. Finally, he forced himself to laugh. "I did not call you," he said. The voice answered immediately, "You did." Kato ran home that evening. He never told anyone what had happened. He knew the village would laugh at him because he had spent years laughing at them, and pride is sometimes stronger than fear. When his mother asked why he had returned so late, he simply said he had lost his way. She looked at him carefully and asked, "Then why are you shaking?" Kato became irritated. "I am not shaking." She reached toward his arm and felt it trembling beneath her fingers. "You are." He pulled away. "It is nothing." His mother watched him disappear into his room. That night, Kato slept badly. Several times he woke thinking he had heard someone walking around the house. Once he heard what sounded like bare feet moving slowly across the compound. He sat upright and listened. Step, pause, step, pause. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Kato held his breath. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Kato." He did not answer. The voice came again, "Kato." He pulled the blanket over his head like a frightened child. The voice became softer. "You came to my house today." He remained completely still until morning. The following day, he convinced himself that exhaustion had caused him to imagine everything. By afternoon, he was laughing again with his friends at the trading center, telling jokes and pretending nothing had happened. But that night, the footsteps returned. This time they circled his house. His dogs began growling before he heard anything. And when he opened the door to check on them, the animals were pressed against the wall with their tails between their legs. Kato looked into the darkness. Nothing. He stepped outside. The air was cold. He called one dog's name, but the animal refused to move. Then he heard the woman's voice from behind him. "You still do not believe." Kato spun around. A woman stood near the banana plantation. She was dressed in white. Her hair hung down over her shoulders. Her face was difficult to see in the darkness. Kato stumbled backward. "Who are you?" he shouted. The woman did not move. "You know who I am," he stared at her. "Nakayima?" The figure smiled. "You called me." Kato blinked, and suddenly the place where she had been standing was empty.
Before the story continues, remember this. These tales were not told for entertainment alone. They were warnings. If you wish to hear more stories from Uganda and beyond, subscribe and listen carefully.
From that night onward, Kato changed. He stopped walking near the hill. He stopped making jokes about spirits. He stopped laughing when elders spoke of Nakayima. But fear did not make him humble quickly. Instead, it made him angry. He began blaming everyone around him. He accused his friends of playing tricks. He accused children of hiding near his compound. He accused his mother of frightening him with old stories. Finally, desperate to prove to himself that there was nothing supernatural happening, he decided to return to the tree during daylight. "I will go there," he announced to his friend Suleiman, "and I will stand beneath that tree until sunset. If Nakayima wants me, she can come and take me." Suleiman stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Kato laughed. "Because I am tired of being afraid." Suleiman shook his head. "Then stop going there." Kato's smile disappeared. "You are afraid too." Suleiman looked toward the hill. "Maybe I am. There are some things a wise man does not test." Kato laughed again. "Then I will test them for you." The next morning, Kato climbed the hill alone. The sun was bright, birds moved between branches, and the world looked completely ordinary. The enormous tree stood exactly as it always had, silent and ancient. Kato walked around it, touching the bark and inspecting the roots. He found nothing. He began to feel foolish. He sat beneath one of the massive roots and ate roasted maize he had carried with him. Hours passed. Nothing happened. He laughed to himself. "There," he said, "nothing." Then he heard a child's voice behind him. "You should not sit there." Kato turned sharply. A small boy stood several meters away. Kato recognized him immediately. The boy had died 3 years earlier. Everyone in the village knew it. Kato had attended his funeral. Yet there he stood, barefoot, wearing the same small shirt he had been buried in, according to the old man's memory. Kato dropped the maize. "No." The child stared at him. "You know me." Kato scrambled backward. "You are dead." The boy smiled. "So are some of the things you laughed at." Kato fled down the hill. He did not stop until he reached the first houses of the village. People stared as he passed. His shirt was torn. His knees were bleeding. His eyes were wild. His mother ran toward him. "What happened?" Kato could barely speak. He grabbed her shoulders and whispered, "Do not go to the hill." She frowned. "Why?" He looked over his shoulder toward the trees. "Because she is there." His mother understood immediately. Her face changed. "Who?" Kato swallowed. "Nakayima." The old woman who had warned him months earlier was sitting nearby when she heard his words. She slowly stood. "I told you," she whispered. Kato looked at her desperately. "Help me." She shook her head. "I cannot help someone who refuses to respect what he fears." Kato fell to his knees. "Please." The old woman stared at him for a long moment before saying, "Go back to the hill. Apologize. Do not ask for wealth. Do not ask for protection. Do not bargain. Tell her you were arrogant and ask forgiveness." Kato shook his head violently. "I cannot go there." The old woman replied, "Then you will carry the hill wherever you go." That night, the haunting became worse. The walls of Kato's house began to make strange sounds. His mother heard whispering from the roof. His dogs refused to enter his room. At midnight, the woman appeared at the foot of his bed. Kato could see her clearly this time. Her white clothing was perfectly clean despite the muddy ground outside. Her face was calm, almost beautiful. Her eyes carried a sadness that frightened him more than anger would have. She looked at him and said, "Why did you come to my house?" Kato began crying. "I am sorry." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For insulting you. That is not all." Kato's breathing became shallow. "What do you want from me?" She stepped closer. "I want you to remember that the dead do not always disappear simply because the living stop speaking their names." Then she turned toward the wall. Kato screamed, "Wait!" She stopped. Without looking back, she whispered, "Tomorrow you will learn why people come to the tree." Then she disappeared through the wall. The next morning, Kato woke with a fever. His body burned. His mother called for a healer. The healer examined him and found no ordinary explanation. Kato could barely eat. He slept for hours, then woke screaming. Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of the tree. He saw the roots opening like doors. He saw figures standing inside the chambers. He saw a woman dressed in white waiting beneath the branches. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she only watched. On the fourth night, Kato dreamed that he was walking through the forest and heard thousands of voices whispering his name. He followed them until he reached a chamber beneath the roots. Nakayima stood inside holding a small clay bowl. "What did you come here seeking?" she asked. Kato replied, "Nothing." She smiled. "Every person who comes here seeks something." Kato looked at the bowl. "What is in it?" She answered, "Everything people leave behind when they come asking for blessings." He looked inside and saw coins, milk, seeds, beads, pieces of cloth, and other offerings. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. His own childhood bracelet lay among them. "How did that get here?" he asked. Nakayima looked at him. "You have been leaving pieces of yourself here for years. You simply did not know it." When Kato woke, his fever was gone, but something inside him had changed. He climbed the hill at dawn. For the first time, he approached the tree without arrogance. He stood before it and lowered his head. "Nakayima," I have come to apologize." The forest remained silent. He continued, "I laughed at what I did not understand. I mocked what other people respected. I thought courage meant refusing to fear anything." A breeze moved through the branches. "Kato, I was wrong." He placed a small offering beneath the tree and stepped backward. Nothing happened. He waited. Minutes passed. Then a woman's voice came from somewhere within the roots. "Now you understand." Kato closed his eyes. "Yes." The voice asked, "What will you tell the village?" He answered, "That I was wrong." The voice became softer. "And what will you tell the young?" Kato opened his eyes. "That not every old story is an invitation to prove yourself." The forest became silent again. Kato returned to the village a different man. He never mocked the shrine again. He became one of those people who spoke carefully whenever the subject of Nakayima arose. When children asked whether the ghost truly lived in the tree, he would smile sadly and tell them, "Some questions are better carried with respect than answered with arrogance." When visitors asked him whether he had really seen her, he would remain silent for a long time before replying, "I saw enough." And whenever someone laughed and said that ghosts were only stories, Kato would look toward the distant hill and say nothing. But the strangest part of the story came years later, after Kato had grown old. One evening, a young traveler arrived in the village. He was confident, educated, and amused by local beliefs. Around the evening fire, someone mentioned Nakayima, and the young man, "People still believe a ghost lives inside a tree?" Several elders looked at him. Kato, now an old man with white hair, was sitting quietly near the fire. The traveler turned toward him. "You believe this story too, old father?" Kato stared into the flames. "I believe that you should not laugh at a place you have never understood." The traveler, "And what happens if I do?" Kato looked up slowly. "Then perhaps you will learn the same lesson I learned." The young man grinned. "Maybe I will visit tomorrow." Kato's face became serious. "If you go, go respectfully." The traveler, "We shall see." That night before dawn, the young traveler disappeared. People searched the roads. They searched the trading center. They searched the river. They searched the surrounding gardens. At sunrise, someone found his shoes near the path leading toward Mubende Hill. Nothing else. 3 days later, he returned. He would not explain where he had been. He would not answer questions. He had lost his voice. For the rest of his life, whenever anyone asked him what happened beneath the Nakayiima tree, he would touch his lips, shake his head, and point toward the hill. And Kato, who was still alive at the time, understood. Because he had once been that young man. He had once believed the world contained only what his eyes could see. He had once laughed at people who bowed their heads before ancient trees. He had once believed fear was weakness, but age had taught him something different. Fear itself was not always the enemy. Sometimes fear was the warning. Sometimes respect was the doorway. And sometimes, in the oldest places, the stories people tell are not meant to frighten children at all. They are meant to remind the living that they are standing on top of memories much older than themselves.